On the day my daughter married, after I had poured $25,000 into every detail of her dream ceremony, she looked me in the eye in front of 150 guests and called me trash. The words rang out through the ballroom as if she had hurled a stone straight into my chest. For a moment, the clinking of wine glasses and the music of the hired orchestra stopped. All I could hear was the pounding in my ears and the sharp echo of her voice. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. The hall was decorated with imported white roses, long rows of candles flickering in polished glass, and a 12-piece orchestra playing under the chandeliers. Everyone wore their finest suits and dresses. I should have felt proud. Instead, I stood frozen, one hand resting on the strap of my handbag where a small velvet box hid. Inside that box was a lace wedding veil handed down from my grandmother to my mother, from my mother to me. I had planned to give it to Natalie as a blessing, a symbol that she was ready to carry the dignity of our family forward. But in that instant, as her words cut me open, I knew the veil would remain in my possession. I glanced around. Some guests gasped softly, others whispered behind their hands. Andrew, my new son-in-law, looked up at his bride in confusion, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded. My sister Helen half rose from her chair, ready to rush to my defense, but I lifted a hand slightly to keep her seated. I refused to give Natalie the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. My throat burned, but I did not shout back. I did not remind her of the checks I had written for her apartment rent, for her university tuition, for her health insurance, for the car she drove. I did not tell the room how many nights I had worked late shifts only to come home and still find a way to make her feel loved. No, I stayed silent. The photographer's flashbulb went off like lightning in a storm, capturing the triumphant smirk on her face. She thought she had finally won that. By humiliating me in public, she could erase years of my sacrifices. What she did not know was that the humiliation she dealt me that night would be the match that lit the fire I had been preparing for months. I sat back down, my hands resting calmly on the tablecloth, though inside, my heart trembled. I reached into my bag, feeling the edge of the velvet box. The veil inside waited, its lace folded like the pages of an unfinished book. I whispered only to myself, "Not yet. You are not ready to wear this." And so, in that glittering hall, filled with champagne flutes and polite applause, while my daughter reveled in her cruelty, I began to turn the final page of a story that would end very differently than she ever expected. As I sat there in that glittering hall holding back the storm inside me, my mind drifted back to the years when the poison first seeped in. Betrayal at a wedding does not happen in a single night. It takes years of careful planting of whispered lies of a child turned against her mother, little by little, until she no longer sees the truth. When Natalie was just 8 years old, she was a small girl with golden hair that brushed her shoulders and eyes as blue as the summer sky over Chicago. I still remember coming home from the hospital after a 12-hour shift, exhausted, but hopeful, only to find her sitting at the kitchen table with her father, Mark. She would look at me as if I were a stranger. Mark had begun his work early. While brushing her hair before school, he would murmur things like, "Your mother is too busy for you. She cares more about work than about being here." He wanted her to believe that my long hours were proof of neglect, not the sacrifices of a woman trying to pay for a roof, for food, for a future. I would arrive home with takeout pizza to make her smile, or kneel on the floor with crayons to draw pictures of castles and princesses. But she rarely looked up. She had already been taught to measure my love by how many hours I sat in the house, not by how many hours I worked to keep it standing. On weekends, when I suggested a trip to the park or the zoo, Mark always had the perfect excuse. She already has plans with her friends. She is too tired from school. Only later did I realize those were lies designed to keep us apart. By the time our marriage collapsed in 2015, his poison had been dripping into her ears for nearly a decade. During the divorce proceedings, Natalie was 20 years old, legally an adult, but emotionally bound to her father's bitterness. He convinced her that I was leaving him for another man, that I had abandoned our family for selfish reasons. The truth was the opposite. It was Mark who demanded the divorce after years of silent wars and endless manipulation. Even then, I kept trying. I paid $800 a month for her apartment in downtown Chicago. I covered her private health insurance at $150 a month. I gave her a $1,200 allowance so she could study marketing without having to work. I paid $8,000 a year in tuition for her private university. I even handed her the keys to a white Ford Focus on her 21st birthday wrapped in a red ribbon. And what did I receive in return? Mechanical visits every Sunday. She would sit on my sofa for exactly 1 hour, answer my questions with one word, and leave as if I were nothing more than a bank teller. She never shared her dreams, never confided her worries, never let me glimpse the child I had once rocked to sleep. That invisible wall grew brick by brick, built from lies she had believed, lies her father had sewn into the fabric of her heart. I told myself it was temporary, that love and time would heal her. I clung to hope even as I watched the distance stretch wider. Now, as she stood at her wedding, calling me trash before strangers, I understood. This was not just the cruelty of one night. It was the harvest of seeds planted long ago. Seeds I had refused to see until they had grown into a forest I could no longer cut down. By the time Natalie turned 24, she was already living almost entirely on my support. I told myself it was normal that many young adults take time to find their footing. Then she came home one winter afternoon with a new glow in her face and a name on her lips. Andrew. I will never forget the first evening I met him. He pulled into my driveway in a modest gray pickup, not the flashy car you might expect from a man who had inherited a chain of fuel companies worth millions. He carried a bouquet of sunflowers, not roses, and shook my hand with genuine warmth. His eyes were steady, and his words were thoughtful. I could see at once he was a good man. During dinner, he asked about my work at the hospital, about my family recipes, even about the lace veil I had once mentioned in passing. He listened more than he spoke, and I thought perhaps my daughter had finally found someone who would ground her. But after he left that night, Natalie leaned across the table, her smile sharp. Do you know how many stations his family owns? She listed the numbers as if she were reading a balance sheet. She spoke of expansion, of branding, of capital. She never once said, I love him. She said, I deserve him. That was when the chill crept into my bones. Love was not her language anymore. Acquisition was. Over the following months, Andrew showered her with kindness. He took her on small weekend trips, brought her thoughtful gifts like books on marketing and journals for her ideas. Meanwhile, she showed me shopping bags with designer shoes and dresses items that clearly cost more than any allowance I had ever given her. When I asked how she could afford them, she shrugged and said, Andrew insists. I tried to warn her. Natalie, a marriage cannot be built on money alone. You must care for the person, not just the company he represents. She laughed softly, tapping her manicured nails on the kitchen counter. Mom, you just don't understand how the world works now. Security comes first. Security. That was her word for it. But I heard something different. Ownership. Control. Andrew, blinded by affection, began signing over small responsibilities in his business to her. She joined meetings, pitched campaigns, and slowly became a public face beside him. From the outside, they looked like a rising power couple. But from where I stood, I saw the gleam in her eyes whenever he mentioned revenue, not when he spoke of his dreams. Each holiday dinner confirmed my unease. He would compliment her cooking, and she would wave it off, steering the conversation back to the next investment or the next expansion. He would reach for her hand tenderly, and she would barely squeeze back her gaze, already on the future profits. I knew then what Andrew did not. My daughter was not walking toward love. She was walking toward a vault, and she was prepared to lock him inside it with his wealth and his company, while she held the key. The signs began small, almost easy to dismiss, like faint cracks in a wall you want so badly to believe is strong. One evening, I called her and asked if she wanted to come over for dinner. She sighed loudly and said she had to work late. But an hour later, scrolling absent-mindedly through social media, I saw a photograph of her at a rooftop bar, champagne glass in hand, standing close to a man who was not Andrew. When I asked her about it the next day, she laughed it off. "Mom, it was just networking. You wouldn't understand." Yet her tone was sharp, defensive, as if she were protecting something far more fragile than a casual evening out. The new clothes kept piling up in her apartment closet. Designer bags, diamond earrings, a watch that I knew cost more than my entire monthly salary, back when I worked double shifts at the hospital. When I asked if Andrew had given them to her, she avoided my eyes. "He doesn't mind. He wants me to look successful," but I could see the receipts crumpled in the trash when I visited her credit card, not his swiping at high-end boutiques. And when I pressed her gently, she admitted she had used the company card Andrew had trusted her with. "It's an investment in image," she said again, rolling the word investment on her tongue like candy. At night, I lay awake, replaying the moments. The empty smile she gave Andrew when he kissed her cheek, the way her phone would buzz and she would leave the room quickly, returning with a glow that had nothing to do with him. My stomach turned with dread. One afternoon, I decided to surprise her at the office Andrew had set up for her in the downtown branch. But when I arrived, the secretary told me Natalie had left hours ago. Where had she gone? I drove through the city streets with a sinking heart, scanning for her familiar figure, but she was nowhere to be found. It was then that a terrible thought struck me. What if this was not just greed? What if betrayal ran deeper? The memory of that rooftop photo came back sharper than ever. I knew I could not continue to guess in the dark. That night, after pacing the floor until my legs ached, I called Thomas, an old acquaintance who had once worked in private security before turning to investigative work. His voice was calm, measured the way I needed mine to be. "Tell me what you want, Rebecca," he said. I hesitated only a moment before answering. "I want the truth, no matter how ugly." When I hung up, my hands trembled, but my decision was firm. I could no longer cling to the fantasy that my daughter was simply misguided. Something darker was unfolding, and I needed proof before it consumed not only Andrew's life but mine as well. As I tucked the velvet box with the lace veil back into my drawer that night, I whispered to the silence of my room, "Not yet. Not for her. Not until I know everything." Thomas did not waste time. Within a week, he had mapped out Natalie's routines with the precision of a surgeon. His daily calls came like clockwork, his tone always professional but heavy, with something he hesitated to say aloud. "Rebecca," he said one Tuesday evening, "your daughter isn't working late at the office. On the nights she claims to be buried in deadlines, She drives to the Palmer residential complex. Same building, same unit, every time. My chest tightened. And who lives there? A man named Marcus Jones. Personal trainer. Early 30s, lives alone. I had met him once, months before, when Natalie insisted she needed to look perfect for the wedding. Tall with a sculpted body and an easy grin that seemed rehearsed. I had dismissed him as harmless then. Now, my stomach sank. She usually stays between 2 and 3 hours. Thomas continued, always leaving with her hair mussed, her clothes disheveled. Rebecca, I'm sorry. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the wood grain, unable to move. The truth I had asked for was here, and it was as poisonous as I feared. My daughter, engaged to a man who adored her, was crawling into another man's bed week after week, but Thomas was not finished. In the following days, he uncovered conversations, snippets of phone calls between Natalie and her father, Mark. Hearing his name again was like reopening an old wound. On August 15, Thomas sent me an audio file. I pressed play and my ex-husband's voice filled the room, low and conspiratorial. You need to secure everything before the wedding, Natalie. The company, the accounts, the house. Once you're married, men change their minds. Make sure your name is on it all. Then came my daughter's voice, colder than I had ever heard it. Don't worry, Dad. I already have half the company. After the wedding, I'll push him to transfer the house too. Andrew's so naive, he'll do whatever I say. And Mark asked, almost laughing. Oh, Marcus is just fun. Andrew is serious business. Marcus keeps me sane. Her laugh on the recording sent a chill down my spine. A cruel, calculating laugh that sounded nothing like the little girl I once carried to bed after she fell asleep on the sofa. For weeks, Thomas piled the evidence higher, photographs of Natalie and Marcus's apartment receipts for expensive gifts bought with Andrew's company card, hotel bookings she disguised as marketing retreats. Every page of the dossier was another nail in the coffin of the image I had desperately clung to, that of a misguided daughter who just needed guidance. The worst part was realizing I was still funding it all. The monthly allowance, the health insurance, the apartment rent. I paid faithfully. My money had indirectly fueled her lies. One September evening, staring at the pile of documents Thomas delivered, I made a silent vow. If my daughter wanted to play with masks and manipulation, then I would give her the stage she craved. I would pay for her wedding, every flower, every sparkling chandelier. But when the curtain finally fell, it would not be applause waiting for her. It would be truth, and she would never see it coming. From that night onward, my role was set. I would become the generous mother, the financial pillar, the silent enabler of her grand performance. Natalie believed she was playing me, but every check I wrote was an investment in her downfall. When she called in November to share the good news of Andrew's proposal, her voice dripped with triumph. Mom, he asked me at dinner last night. It was perfect, the ring, the setting, everything. We're getting married next September. Will you help me make it the wedding of my dreams? The bile rose in my throat, but I forced it down. Of course, sweetheart. How much do you need? She rattled off numbers like a contractor, quoting a mansion renovation. 30,000 for the venue, 15,000 more for flowers, thousands for the orchestra, the photographer, even the honeymoon. When she finally paused, I could almost hear her holding her breath, waiting for me to object. But I didn't. Don't worry, Natalie. I'll take care of everything. Her sigh of relief on the other end was almost giddy. She believed she had me trapped in the same pattern I had followed for years, throwing money to buy scraps of affection. What she didn't know was that every dollar carried with it an invisible string. A string that led straight back to me, and one day soon, I would pull it tight. Over the next months, I signed checks, swiped cards, and met with planners as though I were building a fairy tale. I walked through churches, scented with imported lilies, tasted menus prepared by Michelin star chefs, and smiled as Natalie demanded perfection at every turn. To her, it was confirmation of her control over me. To me, it was the perfect camouflage. Meanwhile, Thomas kept working. His camera lens captured Natalie slipping into Marcus's apartment just days after her engagement. His recordings stacked higher, including one where she admitted to a friend, "Marriage is stability. Marcus is passion. Why shouldn't I have both?" Each new file went into a leather-bound folder I kept hidden in my study. At night, I would pour myself a drink and flip through the pages, each one a reminder of why I could not back down. By spring, the wedding had become the talk of Chicago high society. Guests were already booking hotel rooms, and the Grand Historia Hotel was preparing for its most lavish reception of the year. My bank account bled with every passing week, but I never flinched. This wasn't a loss, it was the price of justice. Still, I was not blind to the risk. I was pouring money into a spectacle where I myself would be the final target. I knew my daughter, her arrogance had grown too bold, too unrestrained. She would not be satisfied with silent manipulation. She would try to humiliate me publicly. And when she did, I would be ready. The stage was nearly set. All I had to do was let her finish weaving the web of her own destruction. September 9th, 2023 arrived like a scene painted for a magazine cover. Blue skies, warm sunlight. The kind of day brides pray for. To Natalie, it was the culmination of every demand she had barked at planners and florists. To me, it was the execution ground for her carefully constructed lies. I slipped into the dark gray suit I had bought months earlier. The mirror showed me a woman, calm, collected, almost serene. But beneath that calm beat the pulse of a strategist waiting for the final move. The church was a sea of imported white lilies, every pew dressed as though royalty were to attend. 150 guests filled the seats, whispering in awe at the extravagance. When Natalie arrived in her silk gown, lace veil trailing behind, she looked every bit the perfect bride. My heart clenched, not with pride, but with the ache of remembering the child she once was before Mark poisoned her with his whispers. She linked her arm through mine. "Mom, thank you for making this possible," she whispered, her tone sugar-coated. I nodded silently. But inside, I thought, yes, and you will thank me again before the night is over, though not in the way you expect. The ceremony unfolded flawlessly. Andrew recited his vows with trembling sincerity, tears pooling in his eyes. Natalie's response was rehearsed, her words of eternal love and fidelity sounding hollow to me, knowing where she had spent her nights. Cameras flashed, the priest blessed them, and applause filled the vaulted ceilings. The reception, however, cracked her porcelain mask. The luxury bus carrying guests broke down, delaying the schedule. Natalie's fury erupted in front of the coordinator. "This is unacceptable. My wedding must be perfect," she shrieked, her voice sharp enough to make guests glance at each other uncomfortably. Inside the Grand Historia Hotel, the air conditioning sputtered. Makeup ran, tempers flared. Natalie barked at the manager, her voice shrill, demanding immediate fixes. And when the kitchen revealed a mistake, only 80 beef tenderloins prepared. Instead of 150, her rage boiled over. She screamed, refused compromises, berated Andrew in front of guests when he suggested chicken as an alternative. I sipped my wine, each outburst like music. The more she raged, the more the mask slipped. Guests began to whisper, heads shaking, glances cast toward Andrew. with pity. By 11 p.m., the orchestra struck up, and the crowd attempted to dance the tension away. Natalie floated back to the center stage, microphone in hand, her smile tight, her eyes burning. "I want to thank everyone for joining us on this very special day," she began, her voice falsely sweet. "But life isn't perfect, is it? Sometimes people you count on the most betray you. They pretend to love you while being selfish and petty." Her eyes locked on me. The moment had come. Her voice rose, trembling with manufactured tears. "Mom, everyone thinks you're generous, respectable. But I know the truth. You abandoned us. You ruined our family. You are human trash." The words sliced through the ballroom. Gasps erupted. Andrew stood frozen. But I didn't flinch. I smiled. Because this was exactly what I had been waiting for. The ballroom went silent after her final words. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Whispers swirled like a storm. 150 pairs of eyes darted between Natalie on the stage and me at my table. They expected outrage. They expected me to crumble, to shout, to weep. Instead, I smiled. A calm, deliberate smile that only someone with nothing left to fear could wear. Slowly, I rose from my chair, the sound of its legs scraping across marble, echoing louder than her accusations. I did not answer her. I did not defend myself. Instead, I walked toward my sister. Helen leaned down and kissed her cheek. "Take care of yourself," I whispered in her ear. "This is just the beginning." Gasps followed me as I strode through the ballroom. Natalie's triumphant eyes tracked me, convinced she had won, convinced she had buried me under shame. She couldn't see the invisible fuse I had lit. I slipped out the service doors, the murmur of shocked guests fading behind me. In the quiet hotel corridor, I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Thomas. A text blinking on the screen. "Is the plan ready?" I typed one word: begin. That night, back at my apartment, I poured a glass of 30-year-old scotch I had been saving for a milestone. I raised it to the glittering Chicago skyline. "To justice," I murmured, "and to consequences." Natalie believed she had humiliated me beyond repair. What she didn't know was that the entire performance had only secured her own destruction. Because starting tomorrow, the world would see who she truly was. The morning after the wedding, I woke with no trace of shame or regret, only clarity. For 28 years, I had been the safety net that kept Natalie from falling. Now, it was time for her to discover the ground. My first call was to the bank, canceling the rent payment for her downtown apartment, cutting the monthly allowance, freezing every automatic transfer tied to her name. The second was to the travel agency. The Maldives honeymoon she had bragged about to friends would never happen. By noon, the insurance company confirmed her coverage had been terminated. Each call felt like removing bricks from the foundation of a house built on lies. By afternoon, my phone rang with Natalie's number flashing. I let it buzz until her voice poured through voicemail, hysterical, desperate begging. Later, she tried from Mark's phone. This time, I answered. "Mom, what have you done?" "The bank called, the trip is canceled." "Andrew is furious. Please fix this." I cut my steak calmly, letting her panic wash over me like music. "Sweetheart, you called me human trash in front of 150 witnesses. Trash doesn't pay for honeymoons or apartments. You freed me." Her sobs turned into bargaining. Promises of change, declarations of love, excuses about stress. But I had heard them all before. Actions have consequences. "Natalie," I told her softly, "for the first time in your life, you'll face them without my money or Andrew's devotion." That night, Thomas delivered the final dossier to Andrew: photos, recordings, financial records. By dawn, the marriage Natalie had fought so viciously to secure was already unraveling. Months later, she was living in a small rented room working at a shoe store to pay her bills. The glamorous mask had been stripped away. She looked thinner, quieter, humbled. And me, I had peace. Not because I destroyed her, but because I finally stepped back and let her destroy herself. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not shouting back when someone calls you trash. It's smiling, walking away, and watching as the truth does the work for you. In life, betrayal often cuts deepest when it comes from the people we love most. But Rebecca's story reminds us of something powerful. Love is not blind, and being a good parent doesn't mean accepting humiliation forever. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not shielding your children from consequences, but allowing them to face reality so they can grow. Money can buy a wedding, a house, even an image of perfection, but it cannot buy respect, loyalty, or integrity. So when someone calls you worthless, don't waste your breath proving them wrong. Stand tall, walk away, and let the truth reveal itself in time. Because dignity is the one inheritance no one can take from you.